Guess we should start.
You're on.
Yeah, well. There we go.
Somebody's left calling motors.
I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams?
I'm here.
Councilmember Wright?
Here?
Councilmember Clay?
Councilmember Clay.
Here. Councilmember Robinson? Councilmember Siemens?
Present.
Councilmember Snipper? Councilmember Schultz?
Here.
Councilmember Robinson is here. He's getting a fan. And Councilmember Snipper will not be here this evening. And Councilmember Robinson is getting a fan because something happened to the air conditioning in here, and we're rather hot. Are there any council comments?
I have council comments, but can I go second so I can get used to my chair?
Yeah, push your button so you can go second. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And just like to, I guess, first disclose that I am on the Tacoma Park Independence Day Committee, but nonetheless, I would like to compliment the committee on their great work on putting together the various portions of the celebration that we had on Independence Day this year. I would especially like to thank the president of the committee, Gene Herman, and Marianne Miles, the parade director, for their very good work at pulling together the program this year. I also wanted to thank the Steve Francis Foundation for the community barbecue that they hosted here on Maple Avenue. And I'd especially like to thank city staff, especially Chief Ricucci in the Police Department, Daryl Braithwaite in the Public Works Department, and Ms. Hadeven and the Recreation Department for all the work they did in making this a successful event. And thank you very much.
Councilmember Clay.
All right. I haven't adjusted my chair yet, but I know it'll happen before the end of the evening. Okay, so let's see. I have several comments, actually. In Ward 3, where Kansas comes north, comes up over the hill and comes down, and then you have to do something where you run into those big yellow things. Is it Cockerel?
That's Cockerel.
Okay, so Kansas at Cockerel. I don't know if WSSC did it, or the power company did it, or the people who live in one of the houses did it, but somebody has dug up like a couple of car-sized patches of the road and then put it back together and didn't do a very good job. And so before it becomes, I think it's got to be relatively fresh. I've only been gone for 2 weeks, and it wasn't like that when I left. So it would be great if whoever's responsible for that could be held responsible for that before it becomes our responsibility. On same vein, thank you to the city for patching the holes on Boyd Avenue, both the one that was getting really problematic, and I noticed that they went and patched some areas that were headed in that direction. So very nice on Boyd Avenue. Some code enforcement issues. I want to know if the city manager has seen them in the Forest Park, Prince George's, Belford area about property upkeep and hanging clothes and things like that. Are you in tune to that? Okay. Well, I was on vacation this last week, and there was some traffic on the listserv about that. I haven't really caught up with it yet, so we should check in on that because there's more than one neighbor that is unhappy about that. I too enjoyed the 4th of July parade. Had a good time. Rode the bicycle. I was challenged by some of my constituents to do something more interesting than riding my bicycle next time, so I rode my bicycle for the last 5 years, and they want to see something more dynamic and interesting. So I don't know, maybe we should have a council float next year or something to see what we all could come up with.
You could pull us in a rickshaw.
That would be different. I'm not sure it's dynamic and interesting, but it would be different. So, yes, I rode with my kids in the parade, and that was great, and enjoyed all of the folks that went by. My mother came along again this year, and apparently somebody who doesn't know who I am came up to my car and started yelling at the car about why I don't do more in my council role. So Whoever that is, that was my family and not me, so if you want to come talk to me, I would be happy to hear what you have to say and what you might like us to be doing. But you missed the target, so try again, and I'd be happy to talk to you. So, yeah, I thought the 4th of July parade was great. It was hot, but I thought everything went off really, really well. So thanks to all the folks who worked really hard to make that happen. And I have a question related to the Folk Festival. I think the Folk Festival made a request to use the recreation bus as part of the, I know that city does a bunch of different things for the various festivals that we have, including like policing services and all kinds of stuff. But apparently they made a request to use the recreation bus, and we're told that we're not using the bus for anything other than an actual city function. I know that we've used the bus for other things, because the very first use of the bus was something that in fact wasn't a city function, and I think that the city is a pretty good partner with the Folk Festival, and we do a bunch of other things. I'm not quite sure how the bus is different from the other things that we do, especially if they're willing to pay the costs of the operations for it. A little backstory to that: a couple years ago, and prior to that, they used Montgomery County buses, I think ride-on buses, and then there was some legal decision that said that they couldn't selectively pick people that they leased buses to, or they'd have to open it up to like becoming a leasing service for buses, and they couldn't do that. And so since then, the Folk Festival has been looking at contracting, and it's one of the things that has driven the cost way up and is creating a significant cost burden. So if there's some way that we could work that out, I know we do. We provide a bunch of other things, and I don't see how it's particularly different if they're willing to pay the cost of the operations of it. So if we could check into that, that would be great. Thanks, guys.
And Councilmember Siemens had a follow-up on one of your comments.
Yes, I just want to let you know that in addition to your mother, I was also confronted by the woman.
Oh, do you know who it is?
I didn't know who it was. I was hopeful that someone, that they would let me know who it is so we can have
Okay.
a longer conversation. But there wasn't time as the parade was moving to find out who it was. And but she had the same concern that the council doesn't do anything, and her advice was that we do something. Anything would be good.
Okay.
So-
Well, I'm waiting for her to tell me what that is so I can get working on it.
Councilmember Robinson.
First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for getting the lights adjusted. I don't have to wear my hat tonight.
Just your swimming suit.
And for bringing a fan in tonight, since we're on a kind of a hot scene here. It's
the fan.
3 fans I see walking into the room.
We usually have more than 3 fans in the room.
Colleen, that was WSSC at Cockrell and Kansas. There was a mighty break in one of the mains there a couple of weeks ago, and there was the house on Kansas had water come right up to the windowsill.
Wow.
It was the lower section, and
That's a lot of water.
there's a lot of water. It didn't get in. There was kind of a firewall or a water wall there, and didn't go into the house, which is good news. But WSSC worked for a couple of days to get it patched up, and they do need to come back. It went down 6 or 8 feet, so there's a lot of fill in there, and it's not surprising that it's settled. And I'm sure they knew that was going to happen, but they need to come back and get it level. Now I'm going to talk about something in your ward, Colleen. Some folks in the Pinecrest neighborhood, which is in my ward, were concerned about tickets being given by the police department at east-west as it hits New Hampshire. And what we have there is a 4-lane road coming into a 1-lane road. It goes from 4 lanes on east-west, and in a matter of a quarter of a block, it's 1 lane on east-west in our city. The right lane turns right, it's dedicated right. The left lane is dedicated left, and the 2 middle lanes, it's kind of unclear what's supposed to happen there. I'd like to see, Bruce, you suggested that we think about having the State Highway Administration take a look at it. I've become a very small student in what happens in 3 or 4 lane situations where that gets to another street where there's a lot of lanes going to the left, and there are more than one solution for this that I've seen. One is yield when green, yield to oncoming when green, so you can still turn left. Another is dedicated 2 left turn lanes. The State Highway has tricks up their sleeve to handle situations like this. So, unfortunately, it's not our intersection, but I would love to have some kind of approach. I'd love to see us approach the State Highway Administration to see if we can get a plan for that intersection, because I think it's not working the way it is. What happens is that so many people want to turn left to go south on New Hampshire that they back up through the portion of east-west that's dedicated for a left-turn lane, and they butt out into East-West Highway, and then other people come around and they snug up so that there's 2 lanes that want to turn left. Without belaboring this point, I think we need to approach State Highway and see if they can't look at it. And the final thing is that I thought it was a great parade. I have one complaint which I'll address to Terry, and that is as perhaps a liaison to the 4th of July, the Independence Day Committee. I would like to see council at the head of the parade. Mayor and council are the face of the city. We're the politicians of the city, and I'd like to see us at the beginning of the parade so that we can well represent our fair city. Mayor, you're up there already. You're number 1 in line in the parade. And maybe we can all think about that as you, my colleagues, we can think about what that would be like. But that would be my proposal. So
I'll bring that up at the debriefing.
At your debriefing, okay. And maybe we can. This is none of you. I did mention it to you, Terry, but I didn't mention it to the others on the council. So if you could think about that a little bit. Right now, it's my observation on Sunday was, Bruce, you're there. And was it a big Cadillac? I forget. Very large car. And then the governor and 2 security details behind the governor, and then the lieutenant governor, and then
Oh, please don't go through the whole thing.
all the county council, and then 5 or 6 elected folks. There was a lot of campaigning going on. A lot.
The school board even came before us.
School board came before us. A whole lot of people came before us. It's
Yeah,
not
glad they went first.
okay. Well,
Just the school board.
just the school board. Well, we should have a discussion. Anyway, not to belabor that one either, but I just want to make that point.
Okay, Councilmember Wright.
First, I want to say a big thank you also to the July 4th or Independence Day Committee. I had 2 constituents mention that they thought the fireworks were the best ever. One was a 12-year observer of the fireworks, and I think the other was a 25 or 30-year observer of the fireworks. And as a mere 5-year observer of the fireworks, I thought the fireworks were the best I'd seen since being in Tacoma Park, so big up for that. I want to thank the police department for taking special care and realizing the large number of people that would be exiting the fireworks area through certain streets in my ward, and making sure that there was ample coverage of officers and cars in those appropriate places. And thankfully, we didn't have any issues this year, no one setting fireworks off on people's porches or anything like that. So thank you for listening to the residents and taking care of that. I want to thank the Green Commuter who supplied the electric bike that myself and my daughter Aviva rode on in the parade. It was great. I appreciate that, and got to know the business owner a little bit better, and he's doing well up there. But we should all visit that bike store as well as the other one. And if you have any interest in electric bikes, Joe Reyes is incredibly knowledgeable and loves to talk about the subject. So I encourage people who want to find out about electric bikes to go visit him. My Councilmember Clay has left, but I suggest maybe we could team up next year, Councilmember Clay, and get one of those 4-wheeled or 4-person pedal cars you can rent on Ocean Beach and somehow get one to Tacoma Park and ride in the parade that way. That's my objective for next year. The only other 2 things are more personal. There's one other thing, policy related. I was up in Rockville again today, and had an interesting conversation about the rebate, but which I'm looking forward to talking with the mayor about later. But also got to experience a very interesting traffic pedestrian pool outside the county council building there. I've mentioned it before. This time I took a picture of it on my BlackBerry, so I'll email you a copy of it, Barb. It is right at the intersection. It's a walk light, but not one that turns on a traffic light. You push it, and it just makes it much more clear to the drivers that is a crosswalk, actually, and that the pedestrian has the right of way. And so it has these large signs that are clearly marking that it's a crosswalk, but then they start blinking when you push the button, and it lasts for 30 seconds or something. It seems like that might be a tool that could be used on some of our places around here. I know some of them are probably state highways, but I know also we've had discussions about how we own some of the state highways, so maybe we would just put some of those in anyway. It's really hot in here, I have to say that. I guess the lead air conditioning is very either super efficient in that it just doesn't use any electricity by not running, or very, very quiet.
My sense is the computer thinks it's Tuesday.
Right. Well. And then two personal things. Just wanted to say happy 8th wedding anniversary to my wife. Tonight is we were 8 years ago. We were actually just getting married. So.
And you chose to spend the evening with us instead of her?
Yes. Well, the second thing is that I'm leaving at 10 tonight, regardless if we're done. It's not a reflection of my care about the environmental action report. But if we're not done at 10, I'm leaving because, unfortunately, as many of you know, I've injured my elbow, and unfortunately I have to have a second surgery, so I need to, which will be in the next few days, and so I need to make sure I get my sleep so I'm strong when they put me under anesthesia. So I'll be leaving at 10 regardless, and my kids are not at home tonight, so my wife said she's going to come drag me out of here if I'm not home by 10.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, it sounds like we should all have sore elbows on our wedding anniversaries.
I wish it was just sore.
I understand. I'd like to say that last week the City Council did not meet because the City Council, or most of us on the City Council, were attending the conference in Ocean City, the Maryland Municipal League. And to be quite honest about it, until you may not know what that is, because I didn't know what it was until I became a member of the City Council. But what it is, it's an organization of all 157 municipalities in the state of Maryland who get together for the better part of 4 days in Ocean City to talk about issues of common concern, or in some cases unique concern, to various municipalities, from itsy-bitsy ones of less than 1,000 people, and sometimes just a few hundred, all the way up to the city of Baltimore. So we're probably in Tacoma Park, falling somewhere in the middle of that range. We're far from the smallest, let's put it that way. And in case you think this was a holiday paid at the city taxpayers' expense, let me assure you that during the whole time I was there, except for the few hours while I was waiting for the hotel to get my room ready, I spent a grand total of 1 hour on the beach, and 20 minutes of that was in the water because the water was so cold I couldn't stand it any longer than that. But the important thing to tell you is that I didn't go down there with any preconceived notions, and I came away greatly impressed by the array of information, the seminars, workshops that we listened to. And what we're doing there is getting to know each other, finding common issues that are of concern that could be addressed by the state legislature, finding out what it is that makes some of us different from each other, and just learning about how cities run and new techniques, new technology, new kinds of stuff that you can use in your city. For example, I was talking to a guy who manufactures porous concrete so that the water literally runs through it. It looks like a Rice Krispie cookie, and the rainwater literally runs through it. It can be used on sidewalks and parking lots and even on roads for speeds under 30 miles an hour. So, I took the literature and gave it to our Director of Public Works. Not that she didn't already know about it. So that was pretty intense, and I just wanted to say that this was, I think, a very worthwhile thing, and I'm looking forward to being able to do it again next year. With regard to the Independence Day Parade, I had a lot of fun. It's my first time getting to ride on the back of a car and having people wave at me and smile at me, and I'm sort of sitting there thinking, what did I do? I'm the same person I was before I got elected, and now all of a sudden I'm some kind of person that everybody wants to wave at. And so it was a little, I found it amusing, but loads of fun. And I want to thank the city for doing it, and the Independence Day Committee for doing, I know they've been doing this for a long time, and they ought to be good at it, but they darn well are good at it. And the thing runs like a very efficient machine. I'm sure the people behind the scenes saw all kinds of things that go wrong, but for me it was, I thought it was just a wonderful day. A couple observations with regard to the committee, to the parade. I was wondering why it is more businesses aren't represented in the parade. We have a lot of businesses, many in our city, hundreds, some of which are unknown to many of us, but a lot of which really make Tacoma Park what it is as a successful place to live and to give Tacoma Park some of its unique character. And I just think maybe businesses need to have more encouragement or more notification of an opportunity to do something with regard to the parade. Maybe there are rules. Maybe the parade can only be so long and take up so much time, and I would respect all of those kind of things. I also think it'd be kind of fun for neighborhoods themselves to have floats, which the word I'll put in quotes, since this is nothing that's going to look like the Rose Bowl parade. But, for the neighborhoods to have some fun. Help bring unity to each individual community within our bigger community. And I went to the barbecue after the parade a couple times. Whatever it was, it just missed me. Held at Maple Avenue and Lincoln. There was a tremendously large turnout for that, but most of it was just from people living in that immediate sector. And I was thinking it would be a great idea to encourage block parties, closing off sections of streets around the city and individual neighborhoods for various neighborhoods to hold block parties, because the through traffic or any traffic at all is just about nil on July 4th, and it would be easy to do. I think it would be a lot of fun and help to build cohesion in the community. So those are just some things. Finally, I guess I want to say the lady who spoke out, "Well, do something," also said the same thing to me. As I went by, shouted it out. I don't know who it was or actually where it was. And I've been thinking about that, and it concerns me because it sort of represents frustration and maybe anger or something like that. And I just want to be very serious right here and just say that this is the very bottom level of government and democracy at work right here. And if people feel unable to communicate what their particular concerns are That's a real big disappointment for me, because I know in my ward, I'm constantly asking people when I see them on the streets or whatever, let me know if there's anything you need me to look at or know about or to help you with, because if you don't tell me, I can't know. I can't see through the walls of people's houses. I don't know what their concerns are, real ones or perhaps just imaginary ones that could be solved with answering a few questions. So I'd encourage citizens, rather than just sitting and steaming about something that perhaps you don't understand, is to please get in touch with your council member, whichever ward you're in, and talk to us. All of us sitting up here aren't doing it just for the fun of it. We're here trying to represent people and trying to answer their questions and trying to figure out the optimal way to run this city. I'm not going to say any more on that, but I just think that that's something that needs to be said. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for saying it. I just got a couple quick comments. I wanted to thank Councilmember Siemens for speaking on my behalf at the fireworks celebration on the 4th. My grandchildren appreciate your stepping in and taking care of that so I could spend a little time with them.
I ducked all the tomatoes.
And I just had a couple things to say about the Maryland Municipal League conference last week. It's always educational, informative to go there, and a great networking opportunity to talk to, I think there were about 950 people registered for it, and to talk to people about their solutions or their questions or concerns about how to deal with things, find a lot of commonality in what all of us deal with. I also had the honor to be elected as the district vice president to the MML board from Montgomery County, and since I'm also serving as the chapter president this year, and I also had the honor to be elected as the first vice president of the Maryland Mayors Association, so I will be the head of that organization in a year. And finally, just wanted to point out to folks that MML established a revenue task force to deal with state revenue issues, just as we've had issues dealing with what the county rebate has been and their situation in their budget and holding back money that we consider to be ours. The same thing happened with the state again this year, and I think in total dollars, the amount that the state held back is more than the amount that the county ended up holding back. So there's equal concern at both levels about getting the money that we feel that's ours for the services that we provided that by formula should be ours. So that's an additional concern, and that task force of about 7 of us is continuing to work. We had a meeting with the governor's staff right before we went to Ocean City, and we are continuing to meet on a weekly basis to try and make sure that we don't face the same situation again next year and have our highway user revenues and our state police aid held back yet again, which we are in danger of finding as the situation that we get to again next year. So I'm working on all those issues, and we'll continue to do so. So I think that's it for council comment, and I will just note briefly in terms of any upcoming meetings that we have three more meetings before we break for August, and those meetings are coming up July 12th, July 19th, and July 26th. And on the 12th, we have a public hearing about whether we're going to propose changes to state law allowing alcoholic beverage sales in Tacoma Park off-sale, for off-sale consumption. And I think that takes care of things in general. The next item is adoption of minutes, and we have 2 sets of minutes in front of us, those for February 1st and June 21st. Would somebody like to move their adoption?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schultz, seconded by Councilmember Wright. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We're now at public comment period for anybody who would like to speak about anything that's not on our special session agenda or our public hearing item, but anything that's on the work session or anything not on the agenda. And if you could identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it.
Good evening. Seth Grimes, 7300 Willow Avenue. I wanted to make sure that the council members and the public are aware that County Council Member George Leventhal, who is wrapping up his second term on the County Council, will be holding a public forum here in Tacoma Park in the council chambers where I'm standing and you're sitting right now on July the 14th. That's Wednesday, July the 14th, from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. To 9 p.m. Everyone's invited, of course, to talk to George and to tell him what you're thinking about issues and to hear what he's thinking about issues, whether you're a supporter of his or not, which I am a supporter myself, but that's not really germane. I hope everyone will come out. So that is a public forum with County Council Member George Leventhal, who's running for re-election to an at-large seat. People can vote for 4 at-large members on Wednesday, July the 14th, from 7:30 to 9 p.m. here in the Tacoma Park City Council Chamber Auditorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
John Peterson, 6700 block of Allegheny Avenue in Ward 3. Just wanted to ask what the update was on the small pocket park that's there, if there was any budget that's been allocated or given.
Yes, there has been $10,000 in next year's budget that's been allocated to the pocket park.
Yes, as I've heard. And where do we stand now, I guess, as far as...
We had a meeting there with Daryl Braithwaite, the Public Works, Director of Public Works, and Todd Bolton. Ali Khalilian, the city engineer, wasn't able to attend, but they reported back to him. And the process has begun in earnest to determine what will fit inside that $10,000 budget. And Daryl is coming up with cost per square foot for curb and for modifications to the perimeter. Todd Bolton suggested that not the main tree, but the second tree might be a mulberry. I can't quite remember.
one of the trees is a mulberry.
The mulberry, in his opinion, should be removed because he feels it is endangering the other tree that's there, which I think is an oak, but I can't.
Yes.
Quite, that's right. So there's been a meeting. It's being attention is being paid to it in earnest.
I didn't know. I didn't know if there was a deadline for getting that budget or those allocated items to choose from.
We're in good shape on that because the budgets for the year that began a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, July 1st. So we have 51 weeks left to spend the money. And so that gives us plenty of elbow room and float to make sure we get the best thing done there.
Okay, great, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move along. Oop.
Hi, Mary Rooker, Ward 2, 804 Larch Avenue. I just want to comment briefly about the Environmental Task Force recommendations. I'm not going to go into details because you've got all that. I just want to say that the eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our own time. I'm not that great of a poet. That's Terry Tempest Williams. I just want to say we must change a lot. Doing what we've been doing is what got us into this environmental mess in the first place. We have been unwilling, most of us, to do what it takes. But we must do what it takes to give ourselves and our children a future. Now, I usually hear two big arguments against environmental actions. One is, oh, we can't do that, whether it's ban leaf blowers or whatever, because people aren't ready for that. Well, this is just human nature. Most people aren't ready for big changes or even little changes sometimes. It's common for people to wait till the last minute. But that would be fatal on environmental issues. If you're waiting for the people to lead, I have to say the people need you to lead. And the other argument I hear is, well, we'd love to do it, but we don't have the budget. We just don't have the money. And I would say we can't afford not to. This isn't really about the environment. This is about us and our children and the quality of a life we're going to have in the future. So you might want to rename the task force on the children of Takoma Park. The eyes of the future are looking back at you, and they are counting on you, and they are praying for you to see beyond your own time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move along to the city manager's comments.
Well, clearly we're having an HVAC problem this evening. I did talk to the Public Works Director just before the meeting started, and we do have our facilities supervisor working on it. I have been looking at my BlackBerry. I asked her to text me with an update. I don't have that yet. So at the earliest opportunity, I'll step out and call her. I realize it's rather uncomfortable this evening for everyone. I just wanted to direct the council's attention to something that was placed on the dais earlier this evening. I think it was last year. The city council had asked us to submit a grant application to the U.S. Department of Energy. I know Councilmember Clay was very involved in that effort, as was Catherine Tunis and probably many others that I'm neglecting to name. Unfortunately, we did learn that we have not been selected for an award. The Department of Energy did provide a fairly detailed commentary on the application, both what was good, what was, perhaps weaker, and that has been shared with the council this evening. So I do suggest you take a look at it. And Councilmember Clay, maybe if you can let me know who else I should provide a copy of this to, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Chief Ricucci, I don't know, did you want to make any comments about the ticketing situation mentioned by Councilmember Robinson?
I was copied on your email, and I took a look at the intersection again. I was pretty sure before. The signage is proper there for no left turn. To make a left turn from the center lane, there has to be center lane markings, and there has to be a sign up there that says left turn. It would be pointing left and one straight ahead. The intersection has been like that for quite a few years. The state does monitor, and especially with everything they've been doing with the construction. They probably wouldn't do anything until the construction is complete, but then they would take a look at it again once the new lights and all the signage, which is part of the renovations of the road. But we also, Captain Corsi in my absence, took a look. We have written tickets there, but there hadn't been any tickets written in the last couple of weeks, so I'm not sure who got a ticket at that location. But it is against the law to make an illegal left turn from the center lane. It has to have markings and signage. So it is proper the way it is now, but it can be looked at, which the decision would be the state's to do that. Just reminding the council once again that we do not get revenue from tickets. We write tickets in an effort to get enforcement and to get compliance as an educational tool. That intersection is a very bad intersection because of the speed. That's one of the reasons we'll be talking about next week, the speed cameras, which will be on the other side, just as you enter into Prince George's County. We got people speeding into the city on that road, and that's one of the reasons we're looking at, but we'll discuss that next week. Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much for paying attention to that request.
And if I can just add that, no, we don't get revenues from tickets, but we do supposedly get reimbursed by the state by for various functions that we provide, including traffic enforcement, writing state tickets, and that's what the police aid is for, and that's what they cut, and therefore we're providing the service and taking care of public safety, but not getting reimbursed as we should by the state. And whether we do write tickets or we don't, the reimbursement should be the same.
Ms. Braithwaite has just actually joined us, but she also just sent me a text message. They think they have the problem corrected, and hopefully things will start feeling better in the next few minutes. So,
good. The environment will be better for the environment report. That's it? Okay, then we will move to the public hearing. This is a public hearing for the general obligation bond for the Public Works facility renovation. Did you want to say anything about this?
Sure. This may seem like deja vu, because we had a public hearing, I believe it was earlier this year, about the issuance of debt for the Public Works facility renovation. By way of explanation, that public hearing assumed that the city would be participating in the State of Maryland's local government infrastructure financing program. For a variety of reasons, they have run into some delays, and as discussed with the council a few weeks ago, we've opted to go ahead and seek financing from a different source. The public hearing that was held earlier this year, the notice was very specific and centered on the state program, and in discussions with the city attorney's office, we thought it would be appropriate to hold another public hearing clarifying how we are going to obtain financing for the project. I would also note that the amount has changed. The prior public hearing reflected a not-to-exceed debt amount of up to $3 million. As discussed with the council during the budget process, the financing for this project has changed. We will now be paying for half of it, of the actual construction cost, with cash, and the other half through bond financing.
And this, we're anticipated to sign this bond and have everything taken care of by the end of the month?
Yes, first reading of the ordinance will take place next Monday. Because of the charter requirement, there is a 14-day waiting period. The holiday and the change in the date sort of threw us off our game a little bit, so we will have a second reading on the 26th, and closing on the bonds is expected the following day.
Okay. So did we have a sign-up?
I don't believe anyone signed up, is that correct?
Nobody signed up, okay. Would anybody like to testify at this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I call this public hearing to a close. We'll move on to our special session, and the item before us is a single reading ordinance authorizing city manager to enter into a contract for construction consulting services for the Public Works renovation project. Would somebody like to move that ordinance?
Move the ordinance.
Second. Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Robinson. Would the city manager like to say anything about this one?
No, I think the majority of the council is familiar with Sharon Consulting. They are a construction project management consulting firm that we have worked with on other phases of the community center project. We had retained them to provide some technical assistance with reviewing the plans drawn up by the architect. The city has always been very satisfied with the work the firm has performed, and the staff recommends that we retain them for the Public Works facility renovation. We have identified a GSA contract that we can piggyback off of.
Okay, are there any council comments? Are there any public comments on this single reading ordinance? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Councilmember Wright?
Aye.
Councilmember Clay?
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson?
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer? Councilmember Schultz?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. And that takes us to the end of our special session. And I think before we get going on the Task Force on Environmental Action Report, we'll just take a very short break, make sure that the presentation and the technology and everybody are linked up. This is our first.
Warmed up, did you say warmed
Yes,
up?
yes.
Just checking.
This is our first use of this technology in the council meeting. We want to make sure we get it right. And so we'll take about a 5-minute break, a chance for anybody to get a drink of water, and then we'll come back and proceed with that presentation.
Yes, yes, it's much better. It's much better. They said that Alvaro said they took it from 60 to 28.
to resume. And we've been joined by the co-chair of the task force, Joe Edgell. And take it away.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for seeing us tonight. Hopefully this microphone can pick me up okay. We have a short presentation for you, but before that I'd like to go through and reintroduce all the members so that you know who is here. If you have no questions, this will be a very short presentation. Really, the reason why we're here are to answer your questions about the report. If you have any, maybe clarify some of the things that might be in there, talk about priorities, that sort of thing. So before I start with the presentation, again, my name is Joe Edgell. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Steve Davies, who I thought was going to be here. Oh, there he is. Great. He magically appeared. I'll let everybody, starting with Steve, introduce themselves.
Steve Davies.
Milford Sprecher, Representative Ward 1.
Terrell North. On this panel, I was living in Ward 6. Now I'm in Ward. I was living in Ward 5. Now I'm in Ward 6.
Tim Mail in Colleen's ward. I'm Satchivan Clay Khalsa in Ward 2.
Nadine Block, and I am in Ward 3.
Where's my guy? There he is.
John Peterson, I'm in Ward 3.
Okay, so short presentation. Basically, what we're going to do is I want to talk a little bit about the methodology that we used, how we came up with the things that we came up with, talk about this decision matrix, which you'll see throughout the document. There's a series of matrices for each chapter, and explain a little bit about what's contained therein. Talk about some of the key report messages. You probably already got these, so it's review, but hopefully we'll be able to help focus your attention on a couple of things. Focus a little bit on the high priority recommendations, ones that the TFEA was suggesting that council accomplish quickly, within certainly 5 years. And mention briefly this appendix called Issues Considered but Not Included, and then talk about next steps. So specifically, we wanted to highlight for you the recommendations and the areas that we covered. We tried to break them into environmental areas just because it was logical. There's no magic to the areas that we came up with: air quality, buildings, climate change, energy, habitat, stormwater, transportation, and waste. You'll notice also that there's a chapter devoted specific to city operations. So that chapter really encompasses all of these particular recommendations. They're more the overarching recommendations. So with respect to the methodology, one of the things that we wanted to let you know is that in order to be a recommendation, it had to receive the majority vote of the TFEA. There were a number of things that didn't receive majority votes. Those things were relegated to that appendix that I'll mention a little bit later. And by the way, if anybody has any questions as we go, feel free to interrupt me. I'm totally okay with that. Second, each subject matter area received at least one high priority recommendation. So all of those subject matter areas you saw, air, buildings, energy, waste, each one of those received at least one recommendation in the high priority. The TFEA thought that each of those areas was important, and so that there was one of the recommendations that we looked at that should be in that high priority recommendation section. You'll notice that some subject matter areas had more than one recommendation contained in the high priority section. Also, in order to determine what was in the high priority, the TFEA used a rank order voting system. Basically, each TFEA member ranked from high to low each of the proposed recommendations that were being considered at that time. So once we tallied all of those recommendations, the ones that had the most votes for number 1, number 2, number 3 were produced in the high priority recommendation section. And then there was a cutoff at, I think, 12. Does that sound right? 12? I think it was about 12 was the cutoff of the high priority recommendations. Everything below that ended up in other chapters. Councilmember Robinson.
I want to know how the use of resources by people, the general population, and buying patterns, how that fit into your discussions and how you handled that kind of concept.
Well, the issues of how public react was part and parcel to most every recommendation we looked at. from an outreach standpoint, how to reach out to city residents, how to change behavior. We also looked at, for example, there was a styrofoam ban that was considered. That was one way that you could specifically look at changing behavior of city residents. But that's a very difficult question because changing behavior is very hard. I mean, as was commented earlier during the public comment portion, people kind of fear change, and people are creatures of habit. So getting change is going to be very difficult. One of the things that you'll hear from us later is, there's got to be some follow-up here, and that might be one of the things that you would like to target for follow-up.
Good. I look forward to that part, the follow-up on how to know that we're making the transitions that we need to make.
Okay. So the decision matrix, there were a number of factors considered in the decision matrix. First one, type of benefit. Now, this included a number of things such as air, buildings, greenhouse gases, habitat, energy, public health, resilience for the community, social benefit, stormwater, transportation, waste, or effects on all the environmental media. So that was the type of benefit. There certainly could be others that we didn't include, but those were the major ones that we wanted to highlight in the decision matrix. Degree of impact, we've got high, medium, or low. This is a difficult concept, high, medium, or low degree of impact, compared to what? Basically, we were comparing the recommendations to other recommendations. And to a certain extent, sort of a rule of reasonableness, wet the finger and stick it up to the wind and see which way the wind's blowing. It's not truly scientific. And if you want to quantify the actual degree of benefit, say the amount of greenhouse gases reduced in tonnage by taking a certain action, you're going to have to look more thoroughly into that later to try to quantify those. Geographic impact is next. So geographic impact, ward, city, regional, that sort of thing. Costs, these are also high, medium, and low. Again, relative to the other recommendations, high, medium, and low. Feasibility, this is another difficult one. How feasible is something? Well, if something was easily obtainable budget-wise, there's no additional legislation necessary, it probably got a high feasibility rating. If something required, say, state legislation to implement or had exceedingly high costs in order to implement, it might have got a low feasibility. If it was some combination of the two, it probably ended up in medium. Fit. There are other plans. I know that several council members, when I met with some of you, spoke to me about other plans, county plans, the Council of Government plans. We tried to look to see how the recommendations that we were making fit with other existing plans as well. Now, I'm sure there are some plans that we may not have considered, but we'll list how well we think particular recommendations fit. And then time frame. Time frame, short, medium, long. Short, 0 to 2, medium, 2 to 5, and long, 5+ years. So what does the decision matrix look like? That's what it looks like. This is a sample decision matrix that came from the city operations section of the report. You'll notice that there's each recommendation is listed with a short description of the recommendation, the type of benefit. Each one of those benefits in the city operations benefits multiple subject matter areas. Degree of impact, high, medium, low, geographic, cost, feasibility, that sort of thing. And you'll see at the bottom of each matrix, which isn't included on the slide that you have in front of you, is the key that decodes some of these things, so you don't have to remember everything that we said here tonight. Something to keep in mind on the methodology, okay? The topic areas that we covered, 9 of them, they do not cover every critical sustainability issue faced by the city. You asked us to do a good survey and to look at the highest priority recommendations, but there are necessarily some things in the limited 7-month time frame that we had that just didn't get considered. But that doesn't mean they're not any less important. So as you move forward in whatever you decide to do on the environment in the future, be it other time-limited committees or to reinstitute some longer-term organization, you'll want to keep that in mind, that there may be other areas to look into beyond that which the report covered. So a couple of key report messages. This is key, sufficient staffing. You probably saw that this is one of the highest priority recommendations that we had. You cannot implement most of these programs unless you put some staffing resources behind them. You just can't. The existing city staff was very gracious in helping all of us figure out what we were doing and navigate the city as well as the other bureaucracies that you all deal with on a regular basis. But keep in mind that when they were helping us, there was other things that they weren't getting done. And so adding a sustainability coordinator or more than one sustainability coordinator, people with the specific job of implementing these environmental recommendations, would be one of the biggest things that would help move these forward. Devotion of budgetary resources. Now, one of the things that I think is important, we were very mindful of the budget situation that the city was in, the cuts the city was facing. And so, as a result, you'll see that a couple of the recommendations are specifically geared toward raising money while also benefiting the environment. Take, for example, the waste recommendations that we made. There's a number of ways that the city could help pay for that program and potentially even pay for other public works operations that might be necessary. So the street light purchase, that was another one that the TFEA thought would probably raise money. So we tried to give you some recommendations that it would be hard to say, well, we don't have the budgetary resources, because the recommendation itself raises the budgetary resources. Implementing ordinances, legislation, some of them will require some action, legal action on your part, or potentially working with the county or working with the state to do implementing ordinances or legislation. Implementation plan, 5 years was the goal. That's what you all asked us to do in the resolution, and that's what we tried to shoot for. Some of the recommendations do go longer than the 5-year plan. We're trying to take a longer-term vision as well, but most of these can be pretty easily accomplished with focus within the 5-year period. And I think this is really important, monitoring and evaluation. You can't just set it in motion and then expect it to happen. One of the things we've seen is that there have been council resolutions and there have been very good efforts in the past at particular issues, but then there was no follow-up, there was no follow-through, there was no evaluation of how the program was working so it could be tweaked and improved to make sure that it was accomplishing the goals that the city had. So that's one of the things you're going to want to make sure that as you move forward on these, you implement. And finally, and I think no less important, is outreach. The city residents have to buy into this, and as you all know, there doesn't tend to be a lot of people at the council meetings. There are people on TV in addition. You've got to find some way of engaging people. People are busy. People have other foci. It's important to help them understand why some of these changes in their daily behaviors and daily habits are beneficial to them as well as the city and the environment. So quickly, high priority recommendations. We had a staffing recommendation. We had a budget recommendation. There was a streetlight purchase, greenhouse gas inventory plan and update. That was something which was done before that we're recommending be updated. That was done in the 90s, and it's probably time for a revision on that. Energy efficiency upgrades, renewable energy purchasing. It could be helpful to help the city residents get some of these renewable energy purchasing programs going with respect to individual households and not just with respect to city and its operations. So that's something to think about. Landlord incentives for building improvements. We wrestled long and hard with how to encourage landlords to do energy efficiency upgrades. Energy efficiency upgrades are not only good for the environment, but they're good for the residents living in the buildings. Make the places much more livable. So that's one of the high priority recommendations you'll see. You'll also notice rewards for recycling. That's a key waste program that made the high priority list. There's also a household organic waste recycling recommendation. Stormwater retrofits. I know the city and the Public Works Department has been doing quite a few of these, and we're encouraging those to continue. Traffic flow improvements with thousands of cars idling every rush hour at lights. That probably isn't terribly good for the environment. And moving traffic along means a lot less pollution and a lot more livable city as well. Small gas-powered engines, there are some recommendations on reducing the use of those small gasoline-powered engines, which the EPA says tend to pollute a lot more than similar larger engines with pollution control equipment. Increase in tree planting. Those were the last of the high priority recommendations. Issues considered but not included. This is Appendix C. There was a lot of issues and a lot of ideas tossed around. Some of those may be priority issues for individual council members. If you don't see it in the list of recommendations, look to that appendix because it's probably there. It doesn't mean we didn't like it. It just means we didn't have time to get to it. Some of the things we didn't like, that's why they're there, but most of them were just, there was just a limited amount of time, and so we tried to focus on the biggest bang for the smallest buck. So next steps. I think it's important. Here's a list of 4 next steps. You probably need something like the TFEA on several of these issues. A streetlight purchase, for example. We would recommend that you get experts together to study how that should be done. If it's not done well, it could be a financial disaster for the city. If it's done effectively and set up well, it could be a financial boon for the city. So it's important to focus community resources on that. We all thought it was important, though, that there be city council member involvement in those additional committees that move these forward. If they're council member priorities, hopefully we can get council member involvement, because having that direct feedback on the issue between the council and what's going on in those committees would be helpful to the committee members, probably as well as the council. Budget, staff resources, I keep beating on this one, but it's important. And public feedback and input. We didn't do any specific public outreach, although our meetings were open to the public, and we did have a few members of the public come, and in fact a couple of the members participate for several meetings, helping us draft some of the ideas. But we didn't do a formal public outreach, and that's something you all may want to consider. Okay, so now the important part, questions and comments, which I will defer to most of my committee members if it's something I can't answer for you. So, subject to your questions, that's it.
First of all, I wanted to thank all of you and also your colleagues who are here tonight for the outstanding effort that you've put in to put this report together. There's a lot of information here. I know it was a lot of work, and I really appreciate we all appreciate the amount of effort and the format that you've done that's made it quite clear what you've looked at, the prioritization, the matrices. They really make it easier to kind of slog through all of this detail and try and make some sense out of it and see the priorities and see some directions that we need to go. One thing that would be helpful, I'm assuming we can get a copy of your report from tonight and kind of make it an addition to what we have in terms of the report, so that people can have that as the overarching piece to begin to look at the details.
Absolutely.
Good. And I know that the report has been up on the website, and I'm assuming we can put this keynote?
Yeah, we'll post it as a PDF file for everybody.
Okay, good. And I also wanted to make a couple preliminary comments about some process. One of the things that I anticipate putting together is some meetings starting sometime probably in late September to have the City Council and the staff get together with residents and talk about budget going forward. We know from the budget process that we just went through that we had to reduce staff, we had to reduce expenditures, and we anticipate that it's going to be even tougher next budget year. So what we want to do is get input from people about city services, what priorities are, and make sure that we have a clear sense going into next budget discussion starting next spring about where we need to go and what the priorities are. And I think one of the things that struck me as I read the report was that, as you noted, there are a lot of places where resources would be needed, either money or staff, to implement a lot of these things and to make this a reality. And I think it would be very helpful to have as many of you who were involved in this as possible at some of those meetings, however they're structured. I anticipate that some of them are going to be maybe by RSVP to a session. We might get together a number of people and have some specific things to go through and some specific priorities, so it's not just kind of, oh, gee, what do you think? But, actually go through some of the pieces of the budget and look at some of the priorities and therefore give us some more detail about what people really think. So the way that some of these environmental initiatives will fit into the existing programs that the city has, the existing staff, the existing priorities, our strategic plan, it'll be very helpful to get a sense of how those fit with what we're doing now, what we should continue to do, what we might stop doing, and how we might replace some things that we're doing with some of these initiatives if that's what people think is most important. So it'll be very helpful to have your input in that fashion, as well as you note, we're going to need to have some community volunteers going forward in any number of ways to maybe whether it's a follow-on committee, whether it's different task forces for particular pieces. I'm not sure what those will be yet. Did you all have any, do you have a sense of, all of you who were involved, kind of the sense of whether a lot of you felt like, well, we signed up for this task force, it was a defined term, we've done our work, now I can move on to something else, or the extent to which people feel like, okay, we bit off that one, now we recognize that there are pieces going forward and ready to sign on for something else. It might be helpful to just kind of have a sense of from the group of how people are feeling about that.
While they're trying to decide, one thing I would add is that had we had this the week after we finished, I think the answer may have been different than it is now when we've had a little bit of a break. So.
I'm speaking for myself. I'd definitely be willing to work on some very specific implementation actions. I'm not so much interested in doing more endless research and decisions, but we do need to prioritize them some way. So I would be interested in doing some very specific follow-up.
And I'd say the same thing in particular if there's a real council commitment to take action on some of these things first, so we have a very clear expectation that our work will turn into a product. And one other thing I would add is that some of this stuff is going to take professional help for the council to figure out how to move forward, because there's lots of models of some of these programs in operation around the country. Some of those models are very technical in how you design a program to provide financing, for example, and there's only so much that a set of volunteers can do, a set of volunteers like us.
I just want to echo that having a defined set of objectives makes it easier to commit the time, because we don't, I know that all of us, sometimes we could feel like we were spinning our wheels at the early stages trying to figure out what we need to focus on. Because we had a mission towards the end, it just made everything easier to get done, and it made it easier to get this together.
Speaking for myself, I would say I'd be willing to help with implementation. It's nice to have, in a way, the task force, it seemed like we were trying to boil the ocean, and it took an awful lot of cigarette lighters to make that happen, but I think we got focused, and so I think, a little smaller pieces would make it a lot easier.
Just have to echo what everybody else said. I mean, the more specific, the better, and as long as it's not meeting every 2 weeks, that would probably be good. Let's see, who does it go to next?
I was one of the original Tacoma Park Committee and the Environment members with Milford, and I think this is one of the things that we would tackle issues as they kind of came up. And I think before we were a little bit directionless in what we were trying to attend to, and I think that this definitely defines something for a committee. And it sounds like everyone's sort of seeing the parts and the pieces that they want to bite off and really tackle and go for. And that's great to hear. And to me, that sounds like what a committee on the environment should be doing. And it seems like maybe that's the way to go forward in my mind.
Speaking for people who aren't here, I think there's probably a portion of the committee who are either burnt out or have other priorities. So there's limited volunteer capacity to do some of this. But I think there are also other people in the community who might latch on to a specific project that's up their technical alley or whatever it is, or their connections.
I'm Bruce Sidwell. I was not on the committee, but I am deeply involved in a couple of other organizations, including the Friends of Sligo Creek. And I think I'm really confident that the Friends of Sligo Creek, among many other organizations, are perfectly willing to step up and help kind of roll out the things, especially for Friends of Sligo Creek, it would be habitat and stormwater and so forth, things that we're already working on.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunis, and speaking as a member of the TFEA, I think it would depend on what the tasks were. I don't think I would want to volunteer for every one of them, but I think there were a number of the reports, parts of the report that I actually drafted and invested a lot of thought in already, and think how they could be implemented. But also, I think maybe there are certain skills and skill set, knowledge set that myself could bring to some of the topics where I might not be as strong on some of the others. So, Nikki, I think you.
Yeah, you can count me in for specific tasks, specific things. And I'll point out you've already done one of our recommendations, which is to pass the ordinance against using city funds for polystyrene foodware.
Yes, it was nice to be able to mark done in the margin on that one.
Who could have brought that up?
Yeah, I wonder.
One of the things to keep in mind is that some of the members were on several of these subcommittees that we broke into, and some people met multiple times each week. It was more than just once every other week when the TFEA met. So some of these folks put in one hell of a lot of work on this report. And I think that's why you're hearing the overall sentiment that people only want to be involved if it's going to amount to something. If it's just going to be running around chasing our tail, people aren't really interested in devoting a lot of effort to it. They'd rather spend time with their kids, walking their dog, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And what that brings to my mind is wondering about kind of keeping the overall overarching picture, and certainly to kind of get started and figure out the best way, some of these things that we can tackle, what resources we can put toward things that I can see putting together, smaller task forces, smaller committees, smaller groups to tackle particular things, but wondering about your thoughts about the kind of the overarching follow-on committee, whether it's a task force version 2. I know you don't want to do task force version 2, but how that can be set up so that there's something beyond, say, if the city were to come up with the money and the will to hire an environmental coordinator, some group that would take the big picture working with them. How do you see being able to do something like that? I hear a lot of interest in, I'll take the pieces I want to bite off and work on those, but kind of don't saddle me with the big picture, is what I was hearing.
Well, if the council decided to create another standing environmental committee of some sort, which is what I think I hear you sort of saying, to look at maybe the big picture of moving the report forward, I'm sure you could find some volunteers from the TFEA who would help with that. But it has to be focused, and hopefully the report can help focus those efforts. If people are trying to do too much, you end up getting nothing done. And so that's why we've recommended a very specific focus on several high-priority recommendations to start with. If you knock those out in the first 6 months, no problem. There's still more to do.
And I have specific comments that I'll hold because I want to give my colleagues a chance to speak. But I just wanted to say that the more of the report that I read, the more that I felt that with the passage of time from kind of pre-budget and post-budget, the world is a different place after the budget that we just went through. People talk about the new reality. I think I felt much more positively about the city's ability to kind of make a decision that we wanted to devote resources, whether money or people, to some of the recommendations, some of the sense of what's needed in this. I felt that much more strongly, that we would have the ability to do that before we went through this last budget. Coming through that budget, having eliminated basically 8 people's jobs, and knowing that the good, valuable city employees that we have working for us didn't get any raises, that there's a real sense of people are committed to going forward, but knowing that we don't have the resources that we always felt we had before. We have a sense of some of the long-term commitments that we have to deal with that we don't want to act irresponsibly toward. We had some, we paid off debt that we had on some old pension obligations that went back a good long time, and trying to take the responsible steps and be fiscally responsible. And it just makes it a lot tougher to be able to, I think, to say yes to some of the things that I know I want to say yes to that are brought forward in this report. I was glad that there was the recognition in the report that we're looking at a time frame of from now and out 5 years, and recognizing that it may be difficult to dedicate the resources that we want to dedicate toward this in the short term, with the hopes that things get better maybe a year or two down the road. But I just want to make sure that it gets said that we've just been through a really difficult time. You've seen, if you've been following anything about what the county has been dealing with and what the state has been dealing with, that they're equally tough times, that we're trying to get back the monies that both the county and the state withheld from us, and it just makes it that much tougher. So I want to be encouraging and positive about what we can do, but I have that nagging reality of what we've just been through with the budget that makes me just want to be cautious in what we can get to as quickly as we would want to, and just know that even if we don't get to it as quickly as we want to, we still want to get there, and that we want to make a commitment that we can live up to. With the greenhouse gas reduction plan of 2000, I was fairly intimately involved in the task force that brought that forward and put it together, and we had we wanted to make it work, but I'll also admit that I was part of the council that didn't follow through on that. And I want to make sure that whatever commitments that we make, that we have the ability and the will to follow through, so that we just don't make empty promises. My colleagues have observations, questions. Oh, the lights are lit. And I don't know which one lit first, so fight it out.
We just pick a direction.
All right, we'll go that way and then that way.
I'll go first.
Councilmember Wright.
So first I want to say thanks for the amazing amount of energy that all of you put into this report. I've read through it once, and I already know that I've kind of only absorbed probably 20% of what's in there in terms of valuable information for me to think about as a policymaker. I think about this very much as the battle of our time and environmental issues in general, but specifically global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm pretty convinced. I pushed forward some things and suggested some things at the beginning of the budget cycle, which I retracted as the budget got tougher. But I'm pretty convinced that when we have the community conversation about what our priorities are, that this is something that the people at Tacoma Park will want to invest in. And I think the way you deal with the budget conundrum is that you make it very clear that there's some specific thing that they're paying, some piece of the property tax, or maybe it's in addition to the stormwater fund, that says this is what you're paying for, and it's clearly going to these environmental efforts. And I think people, the vast majority of people I talk to in Tacoma Park would be comfortable paying for that. And I think that that's the way that we fund some of the very wonderful ideas in here, including the coordinator. And I think that the nice thing is that Bruce has already been thinking proactively about having those community conversations about what our priorities are as a city. I wish that, as Councilmember Robinson has said many times, that we could kind of have more sin taxes around energy, like tax the things that we don't want people to do. As much as I can tell so far, the city doesn't quite have the authority to do a lot of those taxing tools that you'd want to use to make people pay more for their energy, and then take that money and put it into energy and efficiency programs. There's something in here that you cited where we should tax the real estate, put a real estate transaction tax on there. We technically, by the state law, don't have the authority to do that, and have tried to pursue being able to do that in the past, and they haven't let us do it up to this point. But that's unfortunate, but I still think there's other ways to do it. I think a very plausible way would, we have the stormwater fund, we send a bill out to everyone for the stormwater bill. Why can't we add a line that says this is a bill for the environmental fund, and come up with a number for what that is, and what the number is we think that collectively needs to raise to do the priorities we want to do in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think the challenge will be, I think, since we just passed the budget, we'll have a sense as the year goes on what the budget looks like, and if we have any excess or not, if we could do something with that excess. I think we're going to have to focus on things that aren't going to immediately cost us money this year, and then plan for it as part of those community conversations for next year. But I think there's a lot of good things in there that you guys have cited, that we, and women have cited, shouldn't say just guys, that you all have cited, that we can do. That we can really look at the leaf blower ban. Should we do that for all the time, or should we do it so that there's a ban for the times of the year when people aren't really using the leaf blowers on leaves at all, they're just blowing dust around or cleaning off their driveway? Maybe that ban happens in that way for 2 years, and then it goes to a full ban in year 3 or 4. That won't cost us any money. This idea of, actually one of my questions is around the recycling and charging people for, basically not giving them money for recycling, but instead charging them if they're disposing of waste. So my question is sort of, would that be done by saying, okay, if you have a 155-gallon container or whatever it is, you charge X, and if you use 2, you get charged 2 times X? Or is it, I've also seen in communities where people actually have to buy trash bags that are it costs $2 to buy a trash bag, and when that trash bag's full, that's all you can fit into the trash bag. Was there any thought into how we would actually implement that piece?
There was, in fact, and that's actually covered in some detail in the report. We look not only at penalizing bad behavior, but incentivizing good behavior as a way of looking at it. And I think it's important to, as the cliche goes, not reinvent the wheel. We can look to the city that shares our name, Tacoma, Washington, that has a system very much like what the TFEA recommended. And that system specifically, the city provides the containers. And you choose up front the size of trash container you want. Your fee is assessed based on the size of container you choose. You can get as large a recycling container and as large of an organic waste container as you want for free. But your trash container is what sets your monthly bill. And you can change it any time. If you go with a large container, you can reduce that and your monthly bill will be lowered. You can increase it if your family size increases, for example, and your fees would increase. But what the city of Tacoma, Washington has found is that actually reduces waste generation considerably, because it really does reward recycling, right? The less stuff that you throw into that container, the better off you are. and they don't accept extra containers set out. So that's what you get for the week, is that container. Now, there are some potential spin-off secondary effects that we looked at as well, and the city of Tacoma, Washington, I think, has also a good model. They have a twice-a-year time where you can call to have extra stuff hauled away, so that stuff doesn't get dumped in ravines and things like that. Mattresses, old furniture, refrigerators, things like that. So they do account for the inability of people to dispose properly of large items. So it works really remarkably well, and it raises additional revenue. It pays for itself and probably then some.
So I had one other question and then one comment. The question is, there's mention of this kind of public-private partnership for the streetlights, and I'm very intrigued by this, and I tried to dig further into the report and see if there's more specifics around that, and I couldn't quite find it, so I was curious what was meant by that. Was it just meant that we would partner with a bank to get financing to buy and then pay down the financing over time with the energy savings, or was there some business model that I didn't get?
Sachivan will take care of that.
We had a presentation by the National Public-Private Partnership Association or whatever, and they viewed that basically instead of using city funds or bonding or whatever, you can tap private capital to help pay for these programs, and they take a cut as an investment because they view it as a good investment, and we negotiate a contract and have an agreement, and it's just a way to get capital when you don't have it. So that would be one of the low, no-cost items that we should be considering in the short term when we don't have a lot of our own money. And it comes in many forms, I think, and you work with professionals who know how to write these contracts, and that's how you end up with different options. But I don't know that any of us really know there isn't one way to do it.
Yeah.
We don't know if there's the best way to do it at this point.
Yeah.
One of the things their website has, the association that came and made the presentation to us, is a lot of case studies. So they have a number of tried and tested models where they talk about how well it worked or how well it didn't work in that specific instance. So it really is a way for the city, as Sachi even said, to get the funds that you don't have to do the thing you want to do.
And then my last comment is, I think very much, I was thinking as I was reading through this, and it sounds like the people who participated in TFA are kind of in line with this, that we need to carve out and say, okay, we want to do the streetlight project. Who wants to do that? Who wants to be engaged with that? And kind of help us push it forward, and acknowledging that at some point we may need to engage in a professional for some piece of the work. But that to me seems like the very logical path forward. Yes, we really want to do the leaf blower ban. Let's finalize what that would look like, and who wants to do that and help us push that forward. I very much think, and I think Councilman Robinson has said this many times, he finds when task force or committees have very clearly defined goals, citizens do a great job of volunteering and stepping up and delivering on those goals. And it's been my experience in this short time on the council, when we're kind of diffuse and we don't really tell you what we want, then people go off and feel like they spin their wheels, and the committees aren't that productive. And I think it's frustrating for citizens and also frustrating for us, which isn't really a big surprise. That's like Management 101. So, I look forward to us getting our minds around what we think those priorities are soon, and getting people to raise their hands on the few we want to pursue immediately. So.
Would you mind if I ask if anybody else had any other responses to your question? Because it's hard for me to figure out. Anybody else have any other responses?
You asked about specific ones that I would be interested in. To me, the question of impact that was discussed before is really important in deciding which of these we pursue. And the recommendation on shared energy efficiency upgrades and renewable energy purchasing is clearly one that across the entire community, across all the residences, apartment buildings, you could have a huge impact on the climate footprint of the city by pursuing a public-private partnership in that area. So that's the one I would be most interested in. The other thing, going back to the mayor's comments earlier, I do understand the budget climate is very tough, but
and as you pointed out, one of the things we looked at, or the council charged us to do, was to look at that climate action plan, the local action plan. And on page 73 or 74 of this, we go through each of the recommendations as we were asked to. And far too many of those say no action, no progress. And that was during a time of budget surplus and, great economic boom in the town for 10 years. And so it's striking to me that, we looked at that period of time and we did not make progress on almost everything that was recommended in that plan. And I say that not to chide you all, but to say maybe there's something about the process here that needs to be fixed. And going back along the lines of what you said, Josh, and asking people what they think, asking the community, would they rather see the city borrow $1.5 million to build or reconstruct a public works facility, or would they rather borrow $1.5 million to create an energy efficiency program, or so that they could get DOE financing to do so, or do both? Getting public involvement on a question like that, I think my sense is I think yours was, that you would get public commitment to do that. I also think that we're in a time where, sitting in this hot room is actually very apropos, right? Like, if we don't do something, it's going to be sitting in a lot of hot rooms, and much worse than that. I feel like every day in the news there's a new reality about global warming that we didn't know, months before, and it's because the Earth is such this complex thing, and how things are so interconnected. I was listening to this story the other day about just the slight increase in the water temperature affects how the most basic microorganisms in the sea that starts the entire food chain, to plankton, krill, right up the line. And that little change in a very short time frame will basically reduce the ocean's ability to produce fish, which we all eat, and is one of the healthiest sources, like by an astounding amount, like 50% or 60%. And I think it to me is more, we should have been urgent. You're right, we should have been urgent when we had the money. We should have been urgent going forward from 2000, but the sense of urgency, I think, is even greater, and we have to act. And I think it's this, it will be the involvement of citizens who really engage and want to help us push something across the line. Like the joint energy purchasing thing is a challenge because the state actually won't allow the city to create a municipal energy authority. But maybe there is some way that if it's done in a public-private partnership, some private entity could do it. So it's going to take that kind of work and thinking. But I've said enough, I know. You want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just comment really quickly. I mean, one of the things, our primary recommendation is that we have somebody paid who is dedicated for some part of their day to do this. Because that is the main lesson, I think, from the 2000 LAP, the local action plan, is that there was nobody dedicated at any part, for any part of their day paid to do this. So we have fabulous volunteers in the city, but there is a qualitative and quantitative difference of having somebody have this in their job description. And I was one of the people who advocated putting in that we need 3 people to do this for the first year, and then you could tailor people off. But given the current budget, we all recognize that that was an impossibility. But I would strongly advocate, whether it's somebody who's already on staff, this is an overarching priority, so that you can integrate all the new information that comes in on any given day, and that we can figure out how to prioritize these pieces within the overarching structure of what the city is trying to accomplish. And there is a recommendation, too, of how to make money in this plan, and that's where actually I think some professional help would be very useful, whether it's looking at whether or not we can create a municipal authority here to produce energy on our new public works facility rooftop, which should be perfectly situated to do solar on, or whether it's attaching it to a stormwater bill. But there are people who know the answers to these questions potentially quickly. And so that also relates back to the staffing issue. There has to be some way to prioritize it by saying that we dedicate funds to make sure people staff the plan.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thank you all. This is great. It's an overview. a detailed overview, which is what we asked you for, and that sets the stage for us moving on. I tend to write notes to myself as I prepare to make comments, and then I have all these notes on a page, and so now's a point where I have to kind of pick through my notes and figure out what I want to say the most. I like your idea of I think it's important that we structure how the post-TFEA subcommittees or efforts go forward. You have a certain now body of knowledge and a certain experience working together and building a can-do team. Up here, we're politicians, so we're always thinking about how's that work, how's that going to work, what's the policy at the other level, the county or the state or or our own staff. What are we doing? We're thinking about that. What we've wanted from the very beginning and before you existed was to be a model city of some sort, to recapture the reputation, I guess, we had 10 or 20 years ago of being on the cutting edge of things green. That's one of the things I know I wanted, and I know that some of my colleagues shared that. So has the stage been set? In these small committees, or committees is maybe the wrong word, but projects or specific tasks that we want to do. I wrote down a few things. One is make sure we have a fiscal analysis attached to everything to address things, our own budget issues. And our budget, we're in a transition between the old days of lots of money and the new days where there's not as much money. And that's what this is about, too, right? We're transitioning from having plenty of energy and no worries about climate change to a time when we're going to have plenty of worries and climate change will be upon us. So we have to act as if, not as if that's the case, it is the case. So from a fiscal perspective, a sustainability coordinator, we have to convince ourselves that that's a good investment. I feel strongly that it's a good investment. It would probably do us all well to have some evidence of that. So-and-so in such and such city, Arlington or wherever, is a sustainability coordinator, and they report that they saved $300,000 on their budget, and it only cost $100,000 for the sustainability coordinator and a half. So something like that. We need to justify the things that we do in some way, whether it just plain saves us money in energy or some other expenditure, or it helps us make sensible decisions about how to raise money. So there's that fiscal element in how we're going to go forward. That's clear. And we have to be very aware of what kind of risks we're taking. We have certain built-in risks in our own budget right now, and part of our task is to come to grips with what those fiscal risks are in this period of transition where stock markets are going generally down, and not everyone's not assuming that it's going to be a giant glory day fiscal bubble for the rest of the next decade or this decade. I mentioned before that I think it's important for us to somehow monitor our progress towards goals that we have, whether it's progress towards goals that we have as individuals in our homes or things that we decide we want to do in the city. I think that's important. A sustainability coordinator can certainly play a part in that, but we need to keep an open mind and trying to figure out what's countable without too much hassle and figure out a way to count those things. You mentioned Tacoma, Washington, great choice, a comparative lesson, something that somebody else is doing, what can we learn about it, something that's been tried somewhere else, how can we incorporate that? I don't know if I'm describing exact tasks and groups of people to go forward, but these are the kinds of ideas that have come to my mind. The part of monitoring and feedbacking and providing feedback on our progress is, I think, could be linked to a PR or a communication or an outreach effort that would show others like how we're doing, which makes them want to get on board and do more, so that then the word gets out more, and then more people want to get it. We want to, the tipping point where the word goes out and everybody jumps on. That's, to me, the kind of move we need to start here amongst us all. Then I thought about the talk about buying the streetlights got me going. You know, that's Pepco, and it's the state. And Pepco made a presentation at the Maryland Municipal League convention last week. And they presented to a certain group, I was sitting in the audience, their great new benefits program for corporations, and how corporations can get this benefit and that benefit if they install new motors of a certain sort, high-efficiency motors, or if they... And I started raising my hand during a very intense PowerPoint by Pepco, which seemed somewhat out of place to me. I started raising my hand. What does this have to do with cities? Oh, well, this is corporations, and we treat all corporations the same, including cities, which are corporations. Oh, okay. Well, how about streetlights? Well, we're not looking at streetlights here. It's, you know, we may consider that in September. You know, don't hold your breath. I mean, we'll certainly think about it. And so, you know, and I said, you know, you're speaking to a lot of municipalities here. Everyone in this room is a municipality, and you're telling us that you're treating us just like regular old corporations, and can we please make our giant electric motors more efficient? So what are you guys thinking about? You know, come on, Pepco, step up. You're at the Maryland Municipal League conference. Well, I was kind of shushed down, and please let me finish my PowerPoint, and then we were given 8 minutes at the end to have discussion when there's not much discussion. You know, it was very frustrating. So, if we're seriously going to talk about buying our streetlights, we have to think sort of politically in a certain way, and think about where Pepco's thinking is, how we can apply pressure. Well, Nadine's left, but you know, she's done a great job starting the pressure with styro trays and stuff like that. How do we get to Pepco to start making them think about municipalities as municipalities? And likewise, and then I'll kind of cut it short and let my colleagues go on, in a certain sense, I don't know if anyone read the article in the paper a couple days ago about how Maryland needs a constitutional rewrite. You know, that Thomas Jefferson said every 20 years every state should rewrite its constitution for the next generation, and that we're in Maryland still laboring under a constitution that was written in 1867 with like 4,000 amendments to it. And some of the things in the Maryland Constitution tell you where you can and cannot sell liquor, on which street you can and cannot sell liquor. Well, that's crazy. Why is the Maryland Constitution embedded in the Maryland Constitution at that level of detail? It's ridiculous. So that's one of the things we'll be considering next week, or is it the week after, is how to address that. But that's a problem in the Maryland Constitution, and that's the big guys we're talking about. But if we can, but it does affect us because we have limited ability to levy taxes or to have a sin tax on energy or things like that. I'm not saying we can solve these things, but that's another element of how to go forward, is how to properly identify the true obstacles that keep us from getting where we really need to go. Some of it's our own personal actions and how do we save energy and reduce waste, the waste stream and so forth. Other things are specific obstacles that are going to require political action that it's going to be difficult but not impossible, and it we can help ourselves become this kind of model city, and there's no better, I don't know, better or worse, but we're a good candidate for having to be a model city in Maryland, to do things that other municipalities can look to and say, oh, they did that, you know, they're taking that stand. Well, you know, how can that be? But it worked. Oh my gosh. Anyway, all that blah blah blah. Thank you so much for doing what you did. I would like to have some kind of. I'm glad to participate in the next steps, both the conversation to figure out how we structure those next steps and the specific meetings or whatever it takes to push that structure along and do some things that you won't be bored. You'll have specific tasks, and we'll try to make a framework to make things really happen. So thanks again for all of your hard work.
Councilmember Clay.
Thank you. Well, of course, I have to provide requisite thank yous to everybody. And I want to say that I really do appreciate all the work that you did. I worked on the task force when we were looking at the tax and services duplication. So I have kind of a firsthand understanding of how much work you did put in. I think you guys did a little better job than I did, than our group did. Your presentation and your document are certainly prettier than ours was. But what was that?
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Well, but they serve kind of different purposes. We were trying to push a giant stone up a hill, and still are around that. And I think you actually have a much more achievable task. And I think in some ways this report is going to be much more functionally usable for all of us, because there's so much detail in it, and there's so many things we can do right away. So unlike the task force that I worked on, it required a wholesale change at the state level for us to have really significant success, whereas here you have a document that empowers everybody actually to take action, and for us collectively to take action on a lot of things that we do in Tacoma Park Control. And so I appreciate all of that. One of the things I wanted to sort of push out of the way to begin with before I start the other comments is the idea of maybe the public works structure versus, a trade-off in choices there. Public works structure was sort of a standalone cost-benefit analysis, and it's not that we would do that and then not get to do the other things. And I think in some ways we should think about that in the cost-benefit analysis as more of a standalone thing also with some of the environmental stuff, and see how far that gets us before we get to the trade-offs of other things that we necessarily have to give up. I wanted to back up a little bit and just say, this all came out of conversations around the development of the strategic plan. And so we've got the, sustainability, livability, and accountability pieces, and we decided to start with sustainability and try to put together an organization of citizen volunteers that could help us collect get the collective thoughts of the city. So one of the things that I would like to see is to have the things that are in this actually feed back into our strategic plan, and have this be the first of our sort of 3 sections of the strategic plan that has an initial feedback loop into it that strengthens the strategic plan, which then feeds down into our, I don't know if you've seen some of the changes that happened in the last year and how the budget has been developed and things, but this is all feeding back into the decision making that the city is making. So that's one of the things that I would like to see, is to have this thing come back around and feed into the strategic plan, because that is starting to work as a mechanism to drive how we spend money. Of course, it wasn't perfect in the first year that we did it, and everything, but a couple of years of working with this, and I think we'll see sort of more of a feedback loop around that. And so I think that is a good thing that'll happen out of this, is to have this roll back into the strategic planning process, which is really where it was birthed out of. So I wouldn't necessarily look to have the Task Force on Environmental Action continue in its current incarnation. And what I think I would like to see us do next is have an implementation plan put together. I don't know if that would be done by the task force, or it would be done by a group of us or a smaller group of folks, but at this point what we need is an implementation plan. I mean, you've essentially put that forth in the document by identifying, like, what can we do, quick and easy, essentially, in the beginning. And probably the secondary thing that I would like to look at is maybe not so much start with the highest impact things, because I fear that if we try to go with our highest impact piece first, that we might sort of suffer some of the failures of the carbon footprint. And I think what I would like us to do is look at things that feed back into the cost-benefit analysis. And one of the things that stuck out to me in that is the dollar savings, the trash reduction and increased recycling might be an example. So you talked about Tacoma, Washington, but Oakland, California worked exactly the same way. When I first moved into the house, we had the 64-gallon can, or maybe it was more than that. It was the giant can, and we had like 3 foster kids in the house, and we needed a giant can. But as things, a little smaller family, there was a big financial incentive. I think it was $30 or $40 a month that we dropped down to. They had a tiny can. We couldn't do that, but we dropped down to the smaller of the 2 cans and saved a lot of money. And they brought us out, as many recycling buckets as we wanted to have, and we were motivated to recycle. We were already motivated to recycle, but really in a way that we hadn't been before because we had to fit all the trash into our trash can, or we had to go negotiate with the neighbors to see who had extra space, and there would be like bargaining for who might have extra space in their trash can. And we also had bulk pickup day. I think we only had it once a year, but it was great. It was like the free cycle of Oakland. And so the day before, you'd put out everything that you didn't want anymore, and everyone would drive around the neighborhoods to pick out what they needed for their place. And it was a big party in the streets. And then they would come and they would haul everything away, and they did that for the purpose of reducing dumping as a side effect of not being able to haul everything away whenever you wanted to. So I guess I would kind of like to think about that as a possibility for an approach in the implementation plan, because I do think we will ultimately have to task city staff with this. I don't know whether that fits into existing city staff activities, or that's the hiring of a sustainability coordinator. I suspect it's the hiring of a sustainability coordinator ultimately, which I'm okay with. But I think that's probably a way that we're going to be able to squeeze some money out of it, essentially, to help us get partway there for funding this over the long haul. I think another thing that we might think about is instead of getting the state to change all of its rules, to allow us to do some pilots. We might be able to get the state to let us do some environmental legislation in pilot and see how it works out. And that might be a much easier sell. They're like, oh, it's Tacoma Park, let them try it out. And if that works for us, let's play that. Hey, let us try this out, and we can be, the city laboratory for these kinds of things. So I guess that's the sort of the gist of my comments. Is I would really like to see an implementation plan next to see whether or not we should then move forward with smaller groups on specific activities. But I think we have to take this back and get together an implementation plan, see how it fits into the city structure. And one of the things that we talked about in the beginning is this got written up as an idea in the strategic plan before the strategic plan got launched, and we pulled it out and put out the strategic plan and then came back to it afterwards. And one of the reasons was the Committee on the Environment existed, and we were talking about, well, like, what does this mean? And, we wanted this sort of bigger picture, broader than just environmental sustainability, which is one of the reasons why we came back to it. But and I think that you all have achieved that, but now we need to kind of see how that comes back in and how does it fit in with the different structures and things that we're doing before we just sort of plow forward with the committee. And I guess the other 2 points that I would have is that we talked at one point then of moving on also to looking at livability and putting together a group in the city that would look at livability next. And the other concern that I have is that we're burning out volunteers in the city. I see there's a lot of competition for volunteers and for people's time in the city. So I'm going to be respectful of all of the work that you guys put in and make sure that we do have an implementation plan and that it goes forward. But I don't want to burn you all out and have the task force on the environment last for the next 5 years when I think we probably need a more sustainable long-term implementation plan.
If I could just add to what Councilmember Clay said. If you don't want to do one of these recommendations, you'll find a reason not to do it. There's always a reason not to do it. But some of these require a paradigm shift. I think it's instructive that both the city example that I used and the city example that Councilmember Clay used are both West Coast cities. There really is a different way of thinking about tackling some of these problems. I've been very surprised, having lived here off and on for probably 12 to 15 years, at how easy it is to say no at some truly innovative procedures, processes, and ideas. So if you want to do these, we can find a way to do these.
Well, Councilmember Clay and I both brought a certain amount of West Coast culture to this coast, but it hasn't completely sunk in yet. So.
There's 3 Californians.
Mm-hmm. There's Reuben also.
Yeah, because Reuben too.
There are 2 other states on the West Coast, by the way.
Really?
We just happen to be Californians on the council.
Ed, I heard a lot of talk about innovation, and I think it's nice to have innovative projects that are pilots and you can share with other people. There's so much in the report that is not innovative, and we should just be doing because it's been proven, and it's a much easier to do. And we talked about, you just mentioned how we shouldn't reach for the highest impact things. Let's not reach for the most innovative, riskiest things. Let's do the things that have really good models around them.
Just to clarify, by pilot, I meant in terms of like, I didn't mean a pilot for the activities in the report. I meant to get the state to give us the mechanisms to fund them and the authorities to act on
Sure,
them.
I like that strategy a lot. I just think there's 10 other items in the report that don't require that. So
Right.
maybe do those first. As soon as we fill up our easy-to-do list, let's do the pilots.
Things certainly can go on a parallel track, too. You know, it doesn't have to be sequential necessarily.
And before I recognize Councilmember Schultz, I just want to say, in response to one quick thing that Councilmember Clay brought up about the bring the strategic plan relationship to this, that at this point, what I anticipate is that we're going to spend some time circling back on the strategic plan in early September, right after we come back from break, that it's a good time to focus on that. And so we'll go back around and have an opportunity to think about how this report ties back to that. Councilmember Schultz.
Thanks. I'd like to address this whole question of process, which is where the conversation sort of began tonight. I mean, we've said we've done a lot of work. We've come up with a lot of ideas, a lot of proposals, and the question, of course, that hangs over all of our heads is, okay, now what? And if I'm in your shoes, and I've done what you've described, that's a very important, I mean, that's the key question, because it's a question of whether or not all of this work continues to see the light of day and continues to be processed and developed, and that this, what you've done, be seen as somebody looks in the future, looks back in time, as the poet was quoted as saying, that they'll say, well, this was what started it. This was the seminal document. So what I'd like to suggest is a possible process or a path that we can follow, and that would basically be that that the City Council will take this document, will go through some sort of process, but end up with formally accepting it from you and making this an official document of the city. I don't think the City Council wants to get into tearing it apart and making any changes to it. That's what you did as an arm of the city. And then to basically dissolve the task force in the sense of what its original mission was, which you've accomplished. Then what I think would then make sense was to go through a process of creating some implementation committees, because you've got all these different major categories and the various high-level recommendations, and you've got some people that are passionate about it, like Catherine Tunis was saying, that some of these portions she wrote, so she really knows a lot of information about them, and I would imagine that would be something that she would want to work on, but not have to get bogged down in all the other stuff that all of you have been talking about. There's some members of your task force that probably saying, okay, I've had it. I need to move on to some other things that are of interest to me and want to just get out altogether. And we also know by the same token that there's plenty of people in this citizenry of ours who should now be brought in to the process, people that live in Tacoma Park, who've got lots of technical knowledge and would be really interested in focusing on the details of what you've got here to implement this. And so what we could do is sort of an exchange, dropping out some people, creating some committees, bringing in some new people, and carrying forth with those on the task force who do want to stay with it. But naturally, you only want to stay with it if it's going to mean something. And I think then what we would have is a set of committees, and I don't know whether it be 3, 4, 5, or say 8 or 9 of them, that would be more or less tasked to carry out these various groupings of recommendations, to work on them, to take it down to the next level, like some of us were saying, the fiscal level, the political level. In other words, because none of this is going to get done unless we come up with fiscal answers. For example, the idea of a sustainability coordinator, I'm convinced, you've convinced me, that if we're going to go forward in a substantive long-term time frame, that we're going to have a person, at least somewhere in here, to kind of hold it all together at the city level. But that's an idea that needs to be sold to the voters, not to me. I mean, we're just people here who, carry out the will of the voters. It might require raising the tax rate, but if we explain to voters, we, meaning everybody in this room, what it might mean to have this person on staff full-time, and what it's going to cost, and this might work out to be a quarter of a penny on the tax rate or a half a penny on the tax rate, and this is what you're going to get, maybe people will be begging us to raise the tax rate next time around a half a penny so that we can do this. And at some point in time, from the political point of view, as we so ably saw at the Maryland Municipal League Convention, I think our state delegate representatives and our state senator, Mr. Raskin, ought to be brought into this process so that they can advise us, meaning all of us here who are concerned about it, on the political aspects of what's doable at this level, what has to be looked at the state level, and all that kind of stuff. And then I think each of these committees could be attached to a department head, so that there's certain work that's going to be done here that would be mostly having to do with the Department of Public Works, or the Department of Parks and Recreation, or the Department of Housing and Community Development, so that you have an anchor in the city government until such time as we can get a sustainability coordinator on board, and that you're just not free-floating out there as a ball of citizen energy that is trying to get the attention of somebody on the city government, including the city council, because you need technical advice and you want to get down into the weeds and understand how things really actually work when it gets down to the nitty-gritty daily process of running the city. And so you'll be educating yourself, and that'll help you educate this constituents. So I kind of see this as flowing in a way that can harness the energy that you guys have generated. And I would imagine that some of you probably see that this document is essentially, what you've done is sort of pushed the starter button on this thing. And you're kind of getting the starter motor to turn over. But now we really start to move down. We have to start moving down the road. And if we turn off the ignition right now, we aren't going to go anywhere. So we got to harness your energy and your passion, because some of you clearly have devoted so much of your personal time to this because you really care about it. And some of these things, for each of you, some of these things are going to be more meaningful than for other things. I mean, my particular passion might be some of the stuff with regard to the tree and the arborist, and some of the stuff about plastic bags and bottles and stuff like that. But that's just one person who might say, well, that would really get me going. And I think that's possibly a framework for moving forward that I'd like you to think about as we go forward. I just think there's a wealth of ideas in here. Once we start going down the road, we're going to find other possibilities and other ideas and learn more about what other people are doing in other municipalities in Maryland and around the United States. And we might also find that on some of these things that the city of Greenbelt or the city of Hyattsville is really hot about doing something somewhat similar, And if we could, do a bi-municipality or tri-municipality thing, we could actually really start shaking up people's thoughts in Annapolis. So I don't really have any questions for you. I just wanted to share some ideas is really what I'm at this particular point. And I think, given that several of us have already spoken on this, that I think you can probably see that there's a certain commonality of thought up here about the value that we assign to the work that you've done, and the appreciation that we greatly feel towards all of you. Thank you.
And you have a comment?
I'm not a part of the environmental task force, but I'm just here tonight to listen, and because I really enjoyed the report. I just want to say, if this is going to happen in a city, Tacoma Park is the best place to have this happen. The city of Baltimore actually has a sustainability coordinator, and if Baltimore can do it, I think so can we. And I say this, and I'm actually going to meet the sustainability coordinator of Baltimore tomorrow and discuss her achievements and how her team has done it and so forth. So I think this would be a great way to get lessons learned, how they started and where they got their budgets, and just knowledge sharing. I think that would be great to put you all in contact with her as well. This might help.
One of the things to keep in mind is that technically we don't exist. I mean, we may look like we're here, but we're not actually here. By resolution, you all have dissolved the task force on the environmental action already. So if you wanted any of us to continue in some capacity, you would have to take additional action.
Okay, lock the doors.
That would work.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And obviously, thank you all for the work that you and the rest of the committee have done on, or the task force have done on preparing this document. I think when we started out, I had a vision. I can't speak for the rest of my colleagues, but I think we did share a vision that the community with the task force would come back to the council with some prioritization of what we could do to move Tacoma Park back into a leadership position in environmental initiatives. And I really compliment you and the task force for doing that. I think this document is everything and more that I had hoped for in an output from the task force. I've read through the document and looked at it, and I can't say that I understand it. It's very complex. There's a lot of information there. I'm not going to say that I'm unable to understand it, but we'll get there, okay? But my thoughts of this going into it was that when you can come back with the recommendations and the prioritizations, is that I don't want to say no to any of those things. I think that what I was expecting from the task force was picking those things that were probably going to give us the most benefit. Some of them were going to be easy to do, some of them were going to be cheap to do, and some were going to be the opposite, right? They're going to be a little more difficult, they're going to cost a little bit more. But I can't see a reason for me as a council member to override any of what the task force has recommended in this report. But I think that it's appropriate that the task force has dissolved now. I think you have certainly done the work that we wanted, that we asked you to do, and I appreciate that, but now the ball's back on our side of the net. And it's time for us to do our job, which is to take this report and develop an implementation plan. And I certainly support Councilmember Clay's suggestion that the proper way to do this, and I think it's something we talked about before the task force was formed, is to now integrate this into our strategic plan so that we start to give direction to staff on what we want to do, and we start to see where we need to allocate resources as we approach the budget. And again, Ideally, we're going to use the strategic plan as our guidance for budgeting in the future. We've started to do that now with our strategic plan. This is new under Mayor Williams' leadership, that we're using it more to control our budgeting. So I'm going to try not to, I think I figured out tonight why this auditorium's so hot. I'm not going to go on any further, but I appreciate I appreciate the work you've done and what you've brought to us, and I look forward to reaching back out to some of you, or all of you, and looking for help when we decide how we're going to implement it. Thank you.
I had a couple quick questions or observations. I don't know what you've got, Councilmember Wright, and I know we want to finish up by 10 o'clock.
I have a quick comment, that's all. So you can
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just get a little bit worried when I hear this talk about process and reintegrating into the strategic plan, which I think does need to be done in the long term or in the medium term. But I just remember how long it took us to write the strategic plan. And I don't want to ask you guys to go back and say, hey, would you give us an implementation plan? I would say there's the fierce urgency of now. Let's choose some things, and I think that's our job. We read through this, and we say there's some things that we know can be done in the next 3 months or 6 months. And with the mayor's leadership behind that, we say, those are the things we're going to ask you to do, while we simultaneously do whatever process or reintegration we want. But I think it's very important that we choose some things. Maybe it's like in a week or 2 weeks, and we get the people who want to raise their hands to say, yes, I want to do it, and we start charging and go. We don't need to continue to point the cannon. We know the cannon is aimed at some of the right things, so let's push the button and fire that. While people are off and running, we can go back and make sure that's aligned with the strategic plan, and if we want to spend the amount of time I know it will take to integrate that in a coherent way where we want to publicize it, it's going to be 3 months, and I don't want to wait 3 months for us, or maybe 6 months, for us to start the work. And there's a lot of judgment that needs to go into what should be first, because there's political ramifications. We have to understand, we have to talk to Barb about what is there really city staff that we can make those decisions quickly and charge forward on some of those things. So that's just my short comment.
I just had a couple quick comments. Councilmember Robinson brought up the Pepco presentation. Yes, it was frustrating, but I did come away with what they had, and what I took it for was an opportunity to look and make sure that everything that we're doing in the Public Works project, that if there's an opportunity to take advantage of some money that the state is making available and that Pepco is partnering on, that we can do that. And in any other projects that we have going forward, they have a specific amount of money aimed at particular energy efficiency upgrades for both the capital part and the operating part going forward, where we could take some real advantage of things. So making sure that we can do that. It's particular money that I think is available through the end of this calendar year in partnership with the state. So I've given the information that he provided to the city manager, and just make sure that we can take advantage of any of that if it is available to us. One of the things that I wanted to get information from the city manager at a later date, not now, but just to put the question out there. There were some things that you mentioned in your report, such as the Montgomery County's open burning law, and it wasn't clear to me where the line is drawn between what Montgomery County laws are kind of in effect in the city and which ones we would have to proactively adopt. That one was put in there, that you all saw it as something that we would have to adopt, and I just wanted to make sure that we have a clear understanding for that or any other similar issue, what the parameters are on what we can do without having to take a particular step for a particular action. So I don't think it needs an answer tonight, and it may be that the answer to that one is simple, but just in terms of what we can and can't do in that way. I also had a question when you all were talking about solar roofs and the sizes of various residential versus aggregating into a bigger thing, and I wanted to, does the Public Works Director or the City Manager remember how many kilowatts are solar arrays on this roof? I remember 10. Is it 10? 10.4. Okay. I just wanted to have that to put into perspective what you were talking about. There was one to small number for the residential and the bigger piece. And then there was some talk of carbon neutrality, and I wanted to make sure that I understood that concept, and I'll say what I think it is and then tell me if I'm right or wrong. Essentially no net increase with some action as opposed to no carbon effect at all. In other words, we're trying to go back to zero, or are we going to a steady state of some point in time and we don't add from there?
You would be trying to go to zero by offsetting any remaining emissions you have by purchasing credits somewhere else.
So carbon neutrality's goal is zero.
Right.
Thank you. And just one other quick observation. As I was reading the recommendations about possible changes to pay for collection of waste and incentivizing recycling, I thought about, I think the council has considered at least twice, am I correct, Darrell, going to a similar system. And just to make sure that everybody knows that my recollection of one of the main reasons that we didn't was the larger containers that tend to be made available. We had difficulties in where to put them for, the ability for people to put them out at the curb to be collected. They tended to be wheeled containers, and there were a lot of places that didn't have anywhere for them to go, or they were on hills, and we had visions of these things taking off and running down the street all by themselves, given the geography of the city. So just to know that we've considered it twice, we rejected it twice. It doesn't mean that we would reject it the third time when it came back around, but we have considered it.
I might add, Mr. Mayor, that if you want to find a reason not to do something, you will. Tacoma, Washington has lots of hills, and the containers seem to stay put, and they actually have wheels on them. So that probably isn't a good enough reason to say no to the project. We did hear some of the other objections that it might negatively impact people who had an inability to pay, and so the committee put in the recommendation an option, an alternative, where the smallest container would remain free, and it would be the larger containers that a charge could be associated with. You could do it where all of them had a charge, or you could keep a free option, but that would be the smaller option.
Councilmember Schultz and then Councilmember Clay, and then we'll call it quits.
I guess just to continue this conversation, we now charge landlords of multi-unit properties. They pay an additional fee for the trash service, the refuse collection. And I'm thinking, you have people who have one unit and other people that have maybe 8 units in their buildings, and they pay, if I'm not mistaken, they pay similar amounts. And some people, I know one landlord said to me, well, half the year my unit wasn't even occupied, yet I still get billed for it. And so that this idea that you're talking about coming out of Tacoma, Washington, might provide some relief for the person who is a landlord but doesn't have many units or doesn't have many units rented, so that it would be more tied to the actual production of waste rather than some arbitrary number of units. That you have a lot of units with one person in each, or you can have a few units, each one packed with people, generating gobs of garbage. I like that idea. The only other thing I wanted to say was there was some mention about the idea of possibly creating a standing committee for this work, and I would not recommend that you do that, because I think as soon as you put the word standing in something, you more or less are sort of saying this thing will never end. This is open-ended, and once you've done that, you've eliminated deadlines, and then the whole tenor of the immediacy and the urgency of it disappears. I think the word task tends to tell people that they're assigned to do a job, and, let's get a task done. So let's stay away from the idea of creating more standing committees, and, keep these things more focused as much as we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay, you get the last word.
Thank you. So I wanted to make a comment about the idea of bringing this back around to the strategic plan. It's not an idea that I think has to slow things down, and I know how long it took to write the strategic plan because I spent a lot of time working on it. It's really important to the city that we do this. We set up an entire structure that asked our city manager and all of our city staff to integrate all of the work that they do throughout the budget process up through our strategic plan as our managing document. And for that reason, it has to come back through the strategic plan, because we cannot then go back and say to the city manager, actually, I know we've been hammering you on this for at least the 5 years that I've been here, and really hammering you on this for the last 2 years. We finally got you to do these things in the budget that we asked you to do, and it's all lined up now with the strategic plan, and you guys put all this work into it too, because I know you guys worked on it more than I did. But now we're going to throw that out the window, and this is going to be our defining piece on sustainability. Of course, this is going to be our defining piece on sustainability, but it has to come back through the process that we've created, where we've created an accountability mechanism, a way to drive the funding to it. It is a good thing, not a bad thing, to bring this back through our strategic planning process, which drives our budget, and our implementation process for how our city staff does the work that they do. Thank you.
Thank you again for all your hard work.
Thank you for the opportunity to serve the city. Hopefully, this will be a useful report to everybody.
And we all turn into hot pumpkins. It's 10 o'clock.
Woo-hoo.
We're
Back to the
adjourned.
swimming pool.